All right, welcome to my next episode here, negative space, one of my other favorite composition techniques. Um, I have a lot of different ideas about this, so I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet for you. Negative space essentially is when you have a subject somewhere in your photo and the rest of the photo is filled by space, whether it's color or, something. It could just be a blank slate. It could be white. I have a few photos where it's white. It could be black and your subject is maybe white. It's something where the space in the photo emphasizes your subject, kind of like I've highlighted right here. So this is one of the Kodiak bears I photographed over the summer. It was walking across the beach at sunrise, and I used a silhouette technique here to expose for the clouds, and then it forms that little black bear, and the silhouette also emphasizes your subject because the bear is sticking out from the beach, but then also the vibrant orange color there will highlight your bear or your subject. This next photo is also from Kodiak. This is a little bit further up the river. It was just after the golden hour, and it was it was before the golden hour, so it was blue. And I saw this bear crossing the river, and it kind of looked over to the right, and it forms this nice silhouette. So I have this nice blue space here, highlighting my black subject. This one is a little koi, so a cub of the year, so a brand new baby grizzly bear, photographed in Katmai. And I chose portrait for this one because of how close the bear was to me. I actually couldn't fit it in frame if I shot it landscape, but I used this kind of foggy day that we often get in Alaska to highlight my subject, which is this cute little bear cub checking us out on the shoreline here. And this next one, also taken in Kodiak, I use this space above the fishing boat to emphasize a feeling of kind of adventure and isolation out in the ocean here. And although typically negative space has a blank or a kind of empty space, I leave clouds in some of these photos because sometimes I like to include a little bit of detail in that negative space. It doesn't always have to be a blank slate, like here, seen with the puffin, where the puffin caught some fish and he's flying off into the frame here, and because of how close the puffin was to me, the clouds were blurred in the background. I think I was shooting at like f5 or something. So it makes a nice highlight of your subject. But another technique I used here was traveling through the frame. It's wherever your animal is pointing, you want to give that frame a little bit more space than what's behind the animal or the person. And it gives a sense of that object traveling through the frame. So again, there's negative space. Sometimes it's negative space and rule of thirds, like we've seen in some of the bear photos. Sometimes it's negative space and traveling through the frame, and there's other photographers call it different names. Another example, again, is another grizzly bear or a Kodiak bear. This little youngin was crossing the river, and again, it was a gray, foggy day, so I kind of overexposed this photo to highlight the bear, so it's nice and white on the above and below the bear. But I also used this traveling through the frame. Even though he was going to the left, he was looking to the right, so I decided to give the right side of the frame a little bit more space. So typically what you do is where the animal's looking, you can give that side of the frame a little more space. And I also combine this with the rule of thirds, where his eyes and his face is on at least one of the thirds of the frame. And I always framed it a little lower. And it really depends on if there's something interesting in the background. Sometimes I'll include more foreground. It really just depends. So here's an example of, I would consider this a negative space photo. They're traveling through the frame, so that's why I framed it. So they're on the left side of the photo. Combined it with rule of thirds. All right, you don't have to. You could frame it in the middle. But I kind of like this because the bears were making their way to the right in this frame. And I decided to expose this photo so that I could actually get the details in the clouds, because even though that negative space is really nice where it's a blank frame, sometimes it's kind of nice to include some detail in the background so that way you get a sense of the scene. So they were clamming, so these bears on Katmai, they'll dig for clams, and this mother had 4 cubs, and she was teaching her cubs how to clam. And where we were pointed, I wanted to emphasize this kind of emptiness, but also the weather of Alaska. Even though I love my sunrise and sunset photos, they often get a lot of clouds and rain. So I wanted to give that kind of feeling of, this kind of almost stormy, it was very windy that day. These bears are trying to survive in the wilderness. And then another favorite of mine, it may not seem like the most interesting photo, but I really like the way this turned out. It's one of my favorite composition techniques, but it's not something you could do all the time. So it's one of those things you want to keep in the back of your head. If you can execute the photo and use negative space to your advantage, then go for it. With wildlife photography, it's super difficult to achieve all the time. But with people, you have a little bit more control because you can tell people where to go. But thanks for watching this episode. Keep your eyes out for other episodes of different composition techniques and kind of how to combine them together to make your photos more interesting. Thanks for listening to my no BS episode on composition. Keep your eyes out for other ones.